welcome to this David Icke Connector videocast. Well, some years ago, 2016, when Donald Trump was elected, the general opinion was that it was a shock that he'd somehow bucked the system. My own view at the time, which I wrote about and spoke about, was that Trump becoming president was planned all along by the cabal that operate from the shadows and manipulate through both American political parties, making America what it is and what Britain is and what almost every other country is, a one-party state with different masks to obscure that fact. And the question then was, well, why would they want Trump in the presidency? Well, there was a number of reasons which I've written about and talked about, but in the light of current events, there's one particular reason. They wanted Trump to be a figure around which they could divide and thus rule the United States by breaking up American society into basically two camps: those that hate Trump and those that love Trump, and to develop that division and make it more and more extreme until it moved from verbal civil war, which is what we've been having, and censorship civil war, censoring one side and letting the other say what it likes, to move into what has been planned all along, which is a form of physical civil war, and we're starting to see that unfold. And what we're looking at is a form of Marxism that's being developed, and I will talk more later about the way that Marxism plays out. But in my new book, which is out soon and will be is actually available for pre-order now on davidicke.com, The Trigger, I actually address this subject in part of it, and I highlight a man called Saul Alinsky. He died in 1972. He was known as the godfather of community organizing, community manipulating. And among students of Alinsky's work were and are Hillary Clinton, the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and former President Barack Obama. And in a book that Alinsky wrote in 1971, it's called Rules for Radicals, he, among his rules for overthrowing the established order, was to focus upon a common enemy, he said. Once the enemy figure was established, the community would come together in united opposition and put aside differences to focus on a common goal. It's the classic, create an enemy and then focus everyone on that enemy. And this is why Trump was brought to power. One major reason, there are others, to be that common figure of focusing hatred by one side of society. And this is what Alinsky wrote. Pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, polarize it. Don't try to attack abstract corporations or bureaucracies. Identify a responsible individual. Ignore attempts to shift or spread the blame. Now, people who've read my books and watched these videos will be well aware that you're not looking at a Trump supporter, nor are you looking at a supporter of the other face, the other mask on the one-party state, the Democrats. But if we're going to be mature and adult, we have to see the mind game that's being played here. So, everything now that happens negatively in America is the fault of Trump. It's all Trump. And this is so focused attention of the Trump opposition upon Trump that so many other problems and the non-simplistic answers to those problems are forgotten, because it's all Trump's fault. And as part of this division of American society, and it's happening in other countries too, to create this structure for civil war, is to play races off against each other. Actually, play races that are not white off against a race that is white. It's divide and rule. It's classic. And so what you've had from the moment that Trump was elected is the emergence of this label of condemnation and demonization called white supremacy, racism, toxic masculinity, which, you know, when you look at the way it's emphasized, means white toxic masculinity. The suppression of the feminine among Muslim masculine toxicity is never mentioned, because that's not part of the agenda. And so the idea is to divide society along racial lines. This is why all this white supremacy and what have you has been so emphasized, not least, of course, in the wake of the horrific mass shootings of the last few days. And the idea, and this is pure classic Marxism, as I'll come to, is to create distinct groups in the public mind and then play those groups off against each other to transform society in the way that you want. And this is something that requires people to judge others not by their individual behavior, but by their racial group or their political persuasion, overwhelmingly racial group. My philosophy is, or my way of looking at the world and what people say, is to look at what people say, not to look at the colour of their skin or their political persuasion, but to listen to what comes out of their mouth and see if I feel it has validity. And it's one thing is worth remembering. No one in the whole history of humankind has ever had nothing to say at all that doesn't have validity. You might disagree with the vast majority of what they say, but no one has ever lived in this world and not said something that has validity. What group judgment does is forget all that. If you're in this group, you are bad and everything you say must be opposed. Take Trump. You look at the extremists opposing him, and it doesn't matter what he says, unless he's supporting wars against people with brown faces in the Middle East, or in South America, Venezuela, oh yeah, we'll support him then. But apart from that, anything Trump says must be opposed. Why? Because Trump said it. If Adolf Hitler was walking down the street on a beautiful sunny day and said, oh, what a beautiful sunny day, would people have to claim that it was pouring with rain just because Hitler said it was a beautiful sunny day on a beautiful sunny day? This is the level of madness we've reached. And surely, instead of judging people by groups, we look at their individual behaviour, their individual attitudes, irrespective of where they come from or what racial group they're part of. Show me any racial group, any cultural group, and I'll show you lovely people, I'll show you okay people, and I'll show you psychopaths. In every group. But what Marxist group division demands is that we forget all that. This group good, this group bad, ooh, bad. White supremacy. So the white people sleeping in the streets of Los Angeles amid the rats and even gathering cases of typhus, white people sleeping in the streets of Los Angeles with black people sleeping in the streets of Los Angeles with Hispanics. Those white homeless in Los Angeles, they're white supremacists, are they? They're manifestations of white privilege, are they? It's insanity. We should be looking at people's situation irrespective of their colour, background, class. But no, Marxist divide and rule says we mustn't do that. Because once you start looking at people as individuals, irrespective of their race, culture and background, you've lost the group mentality to play one group off against another to transform human society. My own philosophy that I've talked about many times over the years is that we are all points of attention within the same state of infinite awareness, infinite consciousness. That point of attention can be the size of a pea, or it can be massively expanded. It's just a choice about how much of our human mind we want to open to the infinity of possibility. Therefore, to me, the labels that people self-identify with, labels of race and culture and sexuality, and all the others, are illusions. They're not who we are. We are infinite awareness on an eternal journey of exploration across the infinite forever. The labels that we self-identify with, which allows Marxist divide and rule through groups, they are merely experiences, brief experiences, that our infinite state of awareness, our point of attention, is currently experiencing. But once people self-identify with the labels, particularly the racial labels at the moment, then the structure appears to divide and rule society. And while the different groups are played off against each other, the people who are holding the strings of all the groups change the world in the image they've so long desired, which is centralization of power, constant centralization of power, and deletion of freedom of lifestyle, freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, and the free flow of information. Which, of course, those who claim to be opposing Trump are all in favour of. Censorship. If it's the right censorship of the right people, always has them breaking out into a round of applause. The other part of this is that white people are being pressured, excuse me, to be ashamed of being white. What? You see people now, oh, I'm so ashamed to be white. Why? It's just a body of a certain type that allows your consciousness to experience this narrow band of frequencies we call the human world for a tiny brief period before you explore the rest of forever. And what is this obsession with race all about? You're white, you're not white, you're this colour, you're not that, you're that colour. It's racism. Show me a virulent anti-racist, in quotes, activist, and I'll show you someone who's obsessed with race. It's all an inversion. When I see someone, I see consciousness having an experience. Its type of body is irrelevant. You imagine if you were a spaceman on the moon. Sorry, space people on the moon. And you were in different spacesuits made by different companies, and they were different colours. And you were having an argument with your fellow astronauts on the moon, even a punch-up, because your spacesuits were different to each other. I mean, Houston, we have a problem. And people will go, that's bloody mad, that. What are they fighting each other over the different type of spacesuit they're wearing? They're not their spacesuit, they're the person in it. Exactly. But that's what racial division actually is doing, if you break it down. So, white people have to be ashamed of being white now. So, we're supposed to be ashamed because of what some white people have done throughout history to enslave others. The fact that other races have also enslaved others, well, forget about that, because the white race is the target of this cabal, and thus we must only focus on that. Now, when I was a kid, and I first started to learn about the British Empire, and how it went into country after country, so vast, they said the sun never sets on the British Empire. And they imposed their will upon those countries and those peoples. I, just as a little kid when I started learning about this, was absolutely stunned, shocked, and disgusted that one country could impose its will and hijack other countries and cultures in the way the British Empire did, and other empires have done, like the American Empire is doing now in the Middle East, has been doing for year after year after year. But A couple of things. First of all, while the elite of Britain, actually a global elite based in Britain, was imposing its will upon so much of the rest of the world, other white British people, the great vast majority, were living in abject deprivation and poverty on a scale that beggars belief. Just like white people are sleeping in the streets of Los Angeles with black people and Hispanic people today, while white people as a group are called white supremacists and having white privilege. And the other thing is, why am I not personally ashamed of being white, just a body, when white people of the British Empire, for example, did that to other countries? You know why I'm not personally ashamed? Because I didn't do it. Other people, an elite in white bodies, did it. Not me. I don't care if this body is white, brown, black, or any other colour. It's just a vehicle for my consciousness to experience this reality for a very short time. Should Chinese people, in general, be personally ashamed for what Mao Zedong did, and these other Chinese dictators, going further back in history, the horrors that the leadership of China perpetrated? Of course not. You know why? They didn't do it. What about the African elite and the horrors it has and continues to perpetrate upon black African people? Should all descendants of black Africans feel ashamed, personally ashamed, for what those dictators have done over the years? Of course not. Why? Because they didn't do it. Same in Asia. All Cambodians should feel personally ashamed for what Pol Pot did. And other parts of the world, like South America, Central America? Of course not, because they didn't do it. But this collective guilt that we are supposed to accept is all part of this creation of distinct groups to be played off against each other. And I say this to white people, to black people, to Hispanic people, to any kind of people. You are being had. You are being played off against each other, so a tiny elite can divide and rule the target population to control the target population and the direction of the world. So what's going on? Well, what's going on is another form of Marxism. See, there is this myth, you see, that capitalism is an elite structure. Okay, all right, let's accept that. But Marxism, communism, ooh, no, that's a philosophy. That is a political expression of power to the people. That's what it is. Well, first of all, Karl Marx was not a man of the people. He was a puppet of the banking class. See, you can control society. What do you need to control society? You need to centralize power. The only way a few can control the many is to centralize power. That's why we've seen globalization and the centralization of power in all areas of our lives, which keeps going on and on and on. The more you centralize power, the more power you give to the few over the rest. So, capitalism, if you can absorb and control the flow of money and where it goes and where it doesn't go, you create power centrally to dictate to the rest of the population because they do not have the financial power that you do. So what is capitalism? It's the centralization of power via the accumulation and control of money. What is communism? It's creating a political structure in which the tiny few, same with fascism, a tiny few have the power given to them by this structure, this hierarchical structure, to impose their will on the rest of the population. And the common theme between the two is that a tiny few sit upon the top of the hierarchy. They sit on top of the capitalist hierarchy. They sit on top of the communist Marxist hierarchy. Either way, the same elite is in power. But they have to get us to see that they're different, that fascism is far right and communism is far left, when actually they're, again, expressions of the same thing, masks on the same face of control by the few. So, you look at how Marxism works. Look at original Marxism. It divided society. That word again, divided society. Look at America now and increasingly other countries. Between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. In other words, between the haves and the have-nots. And so you had the mass of the people pitted against the few, the elite, at least in theory. The real elite were holding the strings of both sides. And as a result, that struggle, that class struggle, transformed society, and in terms of, for instance, Soviet Russia and communist China, created this hierarchy of dictatorship, in which, at the end of the People's Revolution, the ruling class are in control, just in another form. The new Marxism, and this explains a few things, which I'll come to in a second. The new Marxism is about self-identity groups. Instead of the haves and have-nots played off against each other to transform society, you create groups of self-identity and you play them off against each other. And because they're self-identity groups, you can create many more groups than you can with the haves and have-nots. That's why we're seeing this explosion now of racial identities, sexual identities, and so on and so forth. And they're all little groups to be played off against each other. Once you had the feminist group played off against male groups, masculine groups, and now you've introduced the transgender group through transgender activism, and now you've got the transgender group in opposition to the masculine group and also in opposition to the feminist group in so many ways that see that their influence is being usurped, not least in women's sport, for instance. This is classic Marxism. And because they're self-identity groups, this brings about an explanation for what would otherwise be unexplainable. What you have now is, well, let's look at what you had before. What you had before with what I might call the genuine left, the genuine liberal left, because, you know, this progressive left is not left at all. It's certainly not liberal. It's a tyranny. And so with the genuine liberal left, which is the background that I came from as a kid, that opposed the power of the haves and have-it-alls. So you would be opposing the power of billionaires, for instance, because that was still in the group division of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Not today, no longer with self-identity groups, because it's no longer about class and it's no longer about money, it's about self-identity. So this explains why the so-called progressive left, if only, is in bed with billionaires like George Soros and the billionaires of Silicon Valley. That's why they cheer them when they censor people who are challenging the official narrative. The progressive left, anti-establishment, has become the new establishment. It's unbelievable. Why? Why are they on the side of billionaires? Because it's no longer about have or have-nots. Because if it was, instead of talking about whether you call somebody he, she, or they all the time, you'd be looking at what's happening to homeless people in Los Angeles, of whatever background and culture and race. But no, it's not about that. So, it doesn't matter if you're a billionaire and a total hypocrite and couldn't care frickin' less about the poor and destitute. Do you support our self-identity group? If you do, you're one of us. And so we have someone like George Soros who pours billions into the so-called progressive left. That's why I call them Soros progressives. Who has said that he doesn't take into account social consequences in his financial dealings. He's just there to make money. Why would someone with that philosophy want to put billions into the progressive left opposing Trump? Why would someone like Sheldon Adelson, the Las Vegas casino billionaire and Israeli media owner, want to put vast amounts of money into Trump? Divide and rule. Civil war. Because while the target population is fighting itself, it's not looking at where the power really is. So, you look at what's happened with these mass shootings and all these other horrors that have been going on. They are being mercilessly exploited for political reasons, divide and rule reasons. So, whenever one of these mass shootings happens, it's always, we must have gun control. Now, I don't like guns. I don't have guns. I don't want guns. I think guns are horrible. And the only gun I've ever fired has been an air pistol at a fairground trying to win a coconut. But we should ask why there is this incessant pressure to disarm the American population at a time when the authorities and law enforcement are more and more armed to the teeth, like the military. And although I can't stand guns, it is true that it's not the gun that fires, it's the finger on the trigger. And while we just stay in this black and white bubble when these shootings happen, we need gun control to stop it. Won't stop it at all. Someone wants to get a gun to do something like that, they'll get one. No matter what the law says. They're killing masses of people. Do you think they care about the law on gun control? Ridiculous. And the other immediate reaction is, it's all the fault of Trump. Divide and rule. Civil war. And what that means is the question isn't asked about why are these people clearly in a state of insanity doing this? Questions like, could they be under mind control? Which is, to mind control someone to do that is child's play with the knowledge of mind manipulation that the authorities in the deep state now have. And we shouldn't rule out that possibility, because there's a question, who benefits? Who benefits from these shootings? Who benefits? People that want more gun control and people that want to divide society by blaming Trump for everything. And then we might ask the question, why in the same period that these crazy people are going crazy with guns, and by the way, often producing manifestos and certainly social media trails where they're saying all the things that underpin the narrative, white supremacist. Why in the same period that this is happening are we seeing an absolute explosion of teenagers committing suicide, an even greater number in daily states of anxiety? Why in this same period is the number of people contracting dementia and Alzheimer's going through the bloody roof? Here's a story from a British newspaper this week. Dementia is now the cause of 1 in 8 deaths. Why? And why is it happening in the same era of the smartphone, and through the smartphone, the creation of this vast technologically generated electromagnetic soup getting denser all the time, which is clearly going to scramble the brains of many people when the brain operates electrically and electromagnetically. This is the same electromagnetic soup that is affecting so much of the natural world, which is destroying the natural antenna and radar of dolphins and whales and birds. And that's not going to have a massive effect on the human brain and the way it processes information. Oh no, we want gun control. It's all Trump's fault. And what does anyone think will happen with regard to this as 5G is increasingly introduced, that takes the impact of this electromagnetic, technologically generated insanity to still new levels of disruption of the human mind and the human emotions. Is it really a coincidence that in this same period that this has been introduced, we're having people going crazy in so many ways? In London, knife crime's gone through the bloody roof again. We've had a situation this week where a 17-year-old has picked up a little child and thrown them off the roof of a 10-story building. Someone didn't even know. These are the areas that you explore when you have a smear of maturity and you don't see the world in black and white. But you have to see the world in black and white if you want to divide and rule the population and create civil war in America and elsewhere. Something along the same lines, not quite as extreme, is happening in Britain with Brexit. And it's worth just before I move on to the next stage of this subject, to look at a story from this week. Scientists announce they can manipulate brain cells with smartphone-controlled implant. Researchers determined that smartphone notifications can make brains go completely haywire. It has also already proven that exposure to all sources of cell phone and wireless Wi-Fi radiation can disrupt the blood-brain barrier, which stops toxins and other things getting into the brain, which can cause it to leak. This can also kill brain cells. Research also indicates it can cause irreversible damage on brains, and kids are more affected, not least because they've got thinner skulls. Researchers also determined that it can reduce impulse control, which can lead to violence and homicide. No, it's gun control and it's Trump. And this is now moving. In fact, it started to move that way this very week in terms of what's come to light, and has been moving that way for some time, whereby you take this white supremacy and this idea of violence and you apply it to what have become known as conspiracy theorists, which they call me. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I'm a conspiracy researcher. A theory says, I think on the base of it, this is what's happening. Yeah, that's conspiracy theory. And we should be exploring those things. But much of it is, this is what happened, and this is the facts to prove it. How many conspiracy theories, ridiculed at the time, turn out to be true? Endless numbers. But if you are this cabal that wants to centralize power in the world to the point of a global dictatorship, which is what I'm talking about, then you don't want people to know that's what you're doing, do you? So you have to target people who are exposing it. So what we've had is the abuse, the gathering extraordinary levels of censorship, and the demonization of what are called conspiracy theorists. And that term came into widespread use because of the CIA. which in 1967 contacted major media organizations in the United States, urging them to use the terms conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist to discredit people who didn't believe the official story of the Kennedy assassination. You know, people with half a brain on active duty. And now they are turning the demonization of such people onto another level. This is a story from this week. Exclusive. FBI document warns conspiracy theories are a new domestic terrorism threat. See, what are they calling this whole idea of white nationalism, white supremacy? They're calling it domestic terrorism. And so now you move the term and you apply it to conspiracy theorists. You want to silence and you want to discredit and you want to demonize so that people don't hear what you don't want them to know. Story says the FBI for the first time, the FBI, one of the most corrupt organizations on planet Earth, by the way. The FBI for the first time has identified fringe conspiracy theories. Who says that's what they are? As a domestic terrorist threat, according to a previously unpublicized document obtained by Yahoo News. The FBI intelligence bulletin from the Bureau's Phoenix field office, dated May 30th, 2019, describes, quote, conspiracy theory-driven domestic extremists. Yawn. As a growing threat, and notes that it is the first such report to do so. It lists, because they're moving on to the next stage now, it lists a number of arrests, including some that haven't been publicized, related to violent incidents motivated by fringe beliefs. The FBI assesses these conspiracy theories very likely will emerge, spread and evolve in the modern information marketplace, occasionally driving both groups and individual extremists to carry out criminal or violent acts, the document states, and describes them as domestic terrorists, to my extraordinary surprise. And so this is where it's going. And what they say in their document, the FBI, they describe various conspiracy theories, like the FBI is one of the most corrupt organizations in the world. Not a theory, is it? Blatantly bloody obvious. Anyway, this is two that they mention. New World Order. The belief that a group of international elites control governments, industry and media organizations, instigates major wars, carries out secret staged events and manipulates economies with the goal of establishing global rule. The evidence for that happening is freaking overwhelming. Tidal wave level. But these are fringe beliefs. No, they are beliefs and facts that you do not want people to hear. So we'll demonize people that make them available. We'll call them domestic terrorists. When The Trigger comes out in September, my new book, you watch the demonization of me. And you know what I'll do? I'll laugh in its face. Because we need some backbone here to stand up to this crap. Another one. False flags, it says. The official story surrounding a given terrorist attack or mass shooting is a lie. The event was staged or conducted by the government to justify encroachments on civil liberties. Well, that's a theory, is it? So why every time one of these events happens, particularly since 9/11, although before too, has the reaction been to demand that civil liberties are eroded to respond to the event or the attack? Ladies and gentlemen, of every colour, of every race, of every income bracket, of every sexuality, you are being played. by the string section. To fall into conflict with each other. To get the target population to control itself on behalf of the tiny few psychopaths. We need to put down black and white. We need to see the shades of grey. We need to see that we're being played off against each other. And to stop allowing it to happen. To stop judging people by their race, whatever it may be. By their culture. And looking at what they say, what they do, how they behave. As individuals, no matter what their racial or cultural background. Then, the ability to divide and rule us, and the few control the many, dilutes and dilutes and dilutes the more we do it. And instead of looking at simplistic answers to grotesquely use horrific tragedies that destroy people's lives, destroy the loved ones of those people, instead of using those tragedies for political exploitation, which is what's happened this week grotesquely and always does, we need to have the maturity to look at what's really behind this, because only when we know that we will be able to stop it. Without the cause, you can't find a way to stop it repeating. And alongside that, we need people to stop allowing their backbones to vibrate in terror and turn to jelly at the thought of saying what you really think in a world that's telling you you mustn't do that. Fear of consequences is what got us into this mess. Fear of consequences is what leads to self-censorship. And at the end of that road is the silencing of all information and all opinion that doesn't fit with the official narrative. And at that point, the psychopaths will be in total control. People will see when the trigger comes out that I, for one, ain't gonna have that. Not for a second. I don't care about the consequences. I care about stopping, through the highlighting of it, an agenda that will enslave this world, even more so our children and grandchildren, on a scale that would make Orwell wince. We stand up now. We speak out now. Or we condemn our children, our grandchildren, and ourselves to that future.